I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of familiar names for you. Zohar, thank you so much for being here today. We have been buddies for a really long time,
Yeah,
and I'm really excited to
almost a
catch
decade
up.
at this
And
point.
yeah, pretty close, which is wild. I'm really excited to catch up now that we're like in totally different like spaces in what we're doing online and in
Yeah,
the Jewish world. Um, let's just like dive in.
let's do it.
How did you become the proprietor of Jew Witches? Like, what in your upbringing led you here, and how did Jewish magic become a thing for you?
Yeah, I always share that I grew up in a really mystical home. Both of my parents were very much interested in the mysticism that is found in Judaism inherently. And my parents had different upbringings and experiences. My father grew up not that far, he spent time in Safed, and when they met in the US, they went to lots of spiritual things. They did lots of things together. And when it came to finding a shul for the family, they chose to go to Chabad, which everyone has their opinion on. But they wanted something that had Hasidut. They wanted to have that mysticism that was just accessible, right? The conversations around Kabbalah and these traditions woven into everyday life, right? Things like counting the Omer. It wasn't just we count every day. It was specifically learning the Kabbalistic aspects and really having it as just an average part of Jewish life. And I grew up very much with the knowledge of Kabbalah. And I mean, to the point where I was confused by Megatron and Metatron because they were so similar. I was like, I'm confused why you're saying the angel is in a movie. What is he doing? And, I always give the example of the idea of the sefirot, right? The divine emanations of God, right? You've probably seen the tree of life before. Those are those divine emanations known as sefirot. In English, you'll often see them spelled as the Sephiroth. And there's this idea that they're covered in these shells, klipot, and klipa is literally a shell. And as we do the mitzvot, as we follow the canons, as we do good deeds, we are removing these shells and revealing the light, literally revealing these divine emanations. And when my parents didn't want us to be annoying and they didn't want us to be mean to each other, they'd literally be like, reveal the light. If I want to sit shotgun, but my sister also wanted to sit shotgun, she'd be like, reveal the light, mouse. Like, do the right thing. Like, I don't, I need you to, don't be mean to that person. Don't say rude things. You need to, that's Lashon Hara. You need to reveal the light. And it became like just, it was an everyday thing. And it was referring to this Kabbalistic concept. And it's really difficult for some people to understand how Kabbalah becomes part of the basic everyday part of life. It's not always this shrouded in secrecy old man with a beard that's touching his belly button, hidden in a back room. It becomes part of every day. There's these traditions. For example, we would go to a baby naming and we'd come home with a little baggie that has sugar cubes and garlic in it, which are a very common folk tradition within Judaism, right? We would do Havdalah, and you would take your pinkies and dip it in the wine, and you put it on your eyes for clarity, your temples for wisdom, your heart for love, your pockets for money, right? These are all very common traditions within the Jewish world that I grew up with. They were all around me.
Yeah.
And I remember I posted about it in 2019, I think, on Twitter. And I remember you responded where I was like, I wish I could talk about Jewish magic without people being weird about it. Because the reality is, historically, Jews have been accused of sorcery and witchcraft and evil, nefarious, baneful magic for centuries. And
Yeah.
so there is this huge stigma both outside and within the Jewish community. But then COVID happened and the lockdowns happened, and we were all living on TikTok, and maybe not all of us, but I certainly was. And witch talk blew up, which is, the hashtag used for people who are posting about witchcraft. And
Yeah.
I remember seeing so many people. And I mean, I was young. I was 21, 20, 21 when it first happened. And I was seeing people even younger than was and people older than I was talking about how if you wanted magic, you could leave Judaism and you could become a Wiccan, or you could become a neo-pagan, or you could become an eclectic folk witch or whatever, and saying, well, the Abrahamic religions never do any witchcraft. And I was like, what are we talking about? You're saying that there's no magic in Judaism, boy, do I have some news for you. And it felt so sad because I was seeing people who are like, yeah, I love Hanukkah, but I just wish there was something more. And it's like, we have it. I promise we've got it. You just have to break free from the mold of the sort of Protestant lens that you're viewing religion through, that you're viewing Judaism through. And so I started posting about it. And boy, did it spiral from there.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's funny. I don't think I've ever like really talked about this this publicly, which is kind of funny now that I'm going to do it, which is that like part of what led me to become a rabbi was that while I was in college, got really into Carl Jung and like kind of neo-mysticism and like ideas. You can see behind me somewhere The Invisibles, which is like this collection of comics by Grant Morrison that was really mainstreaming chaos magic was the point of it. And I got like really into this in my early 20s. And then at some point was like, wait, like I grew up Jewish. And so I was like, wait, like, why isn't this in Judaism? I'm going to go become a rabbi and I'm going to like create this within Judaism, right? Like this doesn't exist yet. I'm going to make this a thing. And then like, lo and behold, like you're saying, like, of course it exists,
Right.
right? Like it's
You
already
you
there.
completed the circle. You full circled it. You got right back
Yeah.
to one of the
Right. And
origin
like I was like,
points.
oh, when they were talking about the Sefirot, that they stole that from Judaism, right? Yeah, it's like very
No,
funny.
literally. It's funny. I had
Yeah.
someone comment and they were like, I just realized they were initiated into a left-hand path occult tradition. And they were saying this bracha. They're saying, on my right is the angel, and in front of me, and all around me is. And then they would use like the Holy Spirit. But and then they came to me and they're like, I just found out because I published a little pamphlet on all the bedtime prayers that we have. I published a digital version, and then I just recently released a physical zine version. But they came to me and they're like, I recited that prayer for years, like that invocation as an occultist for years, and I had no idea it was originally Jewish. And I was like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and
that's
there are so
very
many
common.
Jews that say that at bedtime and have no
Yeah, we
idea.
say
Like
that. Yeah,
people in the Golden Dawn are using it within the pentagrams they're painting on
yeah.
the floor, the
It's like I'm
sun and
saying it
like
so that I don't
whatever.
have bad
Yeah,
dreams. You're saying it for a completely different reason.
yeah, yeah. It's incredible. And that's why like when you originally posted about it, I was like, no, go for it. This is like something that's like really, really ripe and people want it. Um, and like I kind of discovered Martin Buber and Zalman Schachter Shlomi as putting forward like kind of neo-Hasidic approaches, which in many ways attempt like I mean Buber wasn't really into magic. He was into like taking Hasidism and turning it into something palatable for the folks of his time. But Zollman was like kind of into magic, I think. He came out of like deep Hasidut. And I was like, oh yeah, I just need to like follow these paths and this will take me where I need to go. But now like you've done so much work to make Jewish magic so accessible and so uh like relatable. Um how do you relate to that work you're doing, which obviously is like very appealing to a whole lot of people, and the like kind of institutional edifice of contemporary Judaism, which still mostly shuns Jewish magic as a concept, and is in fact constantly worrying about why they can't get young people involved or interested. Like, how do you kind of think about that relationship?
I have a sort of critical perspective here in the sense that historically, when we look at how institutional Judaism was built in America, we are looking at a very Protestant lens, right? This was Protestants were in power, and Jews were really, many Jews, not all obviously, but many Jews were really trying to assimilate into the structures of power in the US. And the way that we formed our synagogues, many of the ones, the classic institutional synagogues in the US, many of them are formed on a sort of Protestant-esque basis. And I don't mean to say that they're not Jewish. That's not what I'm saying. They are deeply Jewish. But if we look at the way that we have, I mean, even the setup of a lot of synagogues, the pews, right, the way that we go to shul, the sermons in a lot of our communities, they are not what Jewish communities around the world are doing. And the way that they were built comes from a very different perspective. And it's difficult for me because I did grow up in attending Chabad. So I grew up with a very
Right.
specific version of Judaism, which we all have our one perspective. So when we go to someone else's house, we're like, why do you put your cups in that cabinet? I would never do that. I put them in that cabinet. Right. So like when I would go to a Reform synagogue, I was like, why is there a guitar? That is Muktzah. It's Shabbos. What are we doing? There was that confusion. I recently, I've been to a Reconstructionist show, and I was like, there is a microphone, and you're asking me to write something down on Rosh Hashanah. Like, it breaks my brain a little bit, right? But I think that we have these very institutional things that are not how historically Judaism has functioned. And that's not to say we can't progress. Judaism has always changed. She has always been reborn with every generation in every land she has been carried to. And I think that's beautiful. And so we can look at what worked then and what's happening now, and we can say we made a change and we want to keep changing as opposed to staying stagnant now, right? We built American Jewish institutions through a very Protestant sort of lens, right? Of like, you go to synagogue, you go to Sunday school, and then we have, this and this and this, and we sit in our pews every single day, and we're going to wear the specific stole and the specific robe, and this person can do this, and this person can do this. And we can say, hey, we've gotten to a point, it is no longer what we need, want, or what is working for us. Jews crave connection. And one of the things I get in my DMs all the time is I feel like I'm going to a church. I go in, I sit, I listen to a sermon, I say, hey, Deborah, and I leave. There's no community. There's nothing. There's no sense of mysticism. There's no sense of reverence. There's no sense of piety, of connection to divinity. And that is, I think, what people are craving. And Judaism has options for this, right? We've always had shtibels, right? Your local little shul, minions, right? Kehillas, like groups that come together to have that connection. And they are growing every
Yeah.
single day. And the institution is not changing with Judaism.
Right.
And so I think that with Jewish magic, it really does take us back to the folk, to the people, to the home. Historically, the Jewish home was the center of Jewish magic. And the home, the private domicile, was very different. If we look across European Jewish communities, North African Jewish communities, Asian Jewish communities, African Jewish communities, the way that our communities lived was very different. You could find that connection with your neighbor because you guys shared you shared a private domain, right? That was, you shared a courtyard. You would plant the communal rue, the communal rosemary that was doing the protection for the whole family, the whole entire community, right? If you needed something, like for example, one of the Jewish recipes for a specific removal of a curse requires you to take splinters from the threshold of the synagogue.
Mm.
My synagogue has a metal threshold.
Right.
I'm sort of out of luck there, right? But thinking about those communities, you could walk over to your rabbi's house and just take a little bit, because we were living in a very different space. And so with the Jewish magic that people are really going for, it's because they crave that closeness. And the Jewish magic forces you to be in community. It forces you to go back to the home. It forces you to host and be a guest in, your neighbors' homes, your friends' homes. It forces you to build that community because it's a requirement. It's a requirement to do the work. You cannot do this work alone. And unfortunately, a lot of us feel like when you go to a synagogue, you are going alone, you are sitting alone, and you are coming home alone, which is really difficult. I don't remember what the question was, but I feel
Yeah.
like I said a lot.
No, you did. You said a lot. And one of the things that I think is so fascinating about the image you painted of being so deep in connection with your neighbors. And I think also in most of those places you named, not all those neighbors were Jewish, right? Like you were in
Yep.
connection across difference. And the way that people lived was without these major barriers between each other, just because living was harder and you had to have
Yeah.
um rely upon your neighbors, Jewish or not. And now so much of, like you look, like you were saying, the local synagogues, um, doorframe is metal. Like our institutions are built to look like fortresses. And in fact, like now often have tons of security that like message to everyone, you're not welcome here unless you know you're welcome here. And it is about creating this level of division and isolation, not only for Jews who like have had their Judaism alienated from them and located only within this institutional space, but from your non-Jewish neighbors, right? Which is a really like fascinating question, and one that like I struggle with in some of your work is the difference between um, what is openly available from Judaism for others and what is a closed practice, and how those lines are drawn, and like where those lines come from.
Yeah. So the term closed practice, I did an episode on this. Closed practice is a really new term, and it's one of the really cool things about the internet. It's an internet-born term. This is not a sociological, anthropological, religious studies term. This is not one you're going to find in the literature. It's new and it was built largely by the internet. And we have a lot of Black hoodoo and voodoo and Santeria and Ifa practitioners to realization of this term. But and we have lots of conversations about things like white sage that really popularized the term. But the thing that's interesting about it and that we have nuance about is that closed practice, because it's such a new term, the definition is at times fluid, right? So the definition that I usually use with, and I provide, there's nuance in the term, even in this definition I use, which is it's a practice or a tradition that you either need to be, in order to have access to, you need to be born into it or be initiated into it. So either, for example, in Judaism, right, you're born Jewish, or you come to Judaism through conversion. And I'm so sorry about my neighbor's dogs. They do this every day, and
I can't hear it.
unfortunately, oh, perfect. Thank God.
Yeah.
Um, so either you are born into Judaism or you convert into Judaism, right? That is the opening of the door. And even in that, right, we have some questions like, for example, how does this change for a proselytizing religion, right? Like Mormonism, which actively seeks out converts, even though they do have things that you need to have a temple recommend to get in there to do certain things. You have to be, endowed and do all these, you need to be in good standing, you need to have all these things to do it, right? How do we compare and contrast these seemingly similar things when one is a proselytizing and one is non-proselytizing, right? Judaism isn't trying to go out and convert you. I'm not trying to force anyone to become Jewish, nor am I interested in anyone else becoming Jewish, because Judaism has sort of this unique premise of the idea of every person in the world has their lot in life and they have their responsibilities. And you don't have to be Jewish to be a good person. You don't have to be Jewish to be a moral person. You don't have to be Jewish to have a deep connection to divinity, to God, to Hashem, however, Allah, whoever you are, however you're naming divinity. You don't have to be Jewish to have that. The story in Judaism is that, Hashem offered the 613 commandments, the covenant, right, to all the nations of the world. And everyone was like, no thanks. And then Jews were like, we have a problem. We'll do it. 613 can't be that hard. And we took them on, right? And that's not to say you can't join the covenant. You absolutely can. Converts are part of Judaism and they have always been part of Judaism. Remember, Abraham and Sarah were not born Abraham and Sarah, right? They were not born that way and they came to Judaism. We have these long, beautiful history of people saying, I see this covenant and I see this people who choose this way of life. I also choose this. My soul knows where I am. And so in Judaism, when it comes to closed practices, we have to look at what the theology says, what our tradition teaches us that I'm not stopping you from choosing. If you want to follow the commandments and you don't even want to become Jewish, you just want to do it, that's fine. There's nothing, I'm not, it's really none of my business what you do in your own home. And then there is the community aspect and the historical aspect, right? Judaism is and has really historically been about I see you and you see me, and we are in this together. Again, you cannot do Judaism alone, right? Whether it's something like a Beis Din, right, where you need a rabbinical court, where you need Jews to be on the rabbinical court, right? Or if we're talking about something like going to the mikveh, right? You need an attendant, and that attendant is Jewish, right? Who can say, you've done this cleanly, you've gone through, you've done your immersion. I have witnessed your immersion. I've seen it, or it's making aliyah, being called up to read from the Torah, right? That is something that you need to do in the presence of a quorum of a minion of 10 adult Jews. Oftentimes, in many traditional communities, they be Jewish adult men, but you need other Jews to complete those rituals. And one of the things that I struggle with, right, is the reality that we are no longer in the shtetl, in the sense that
Mhm.
I can't turn around and just be like, you want to come to my house and we can do this to any person around me because, I can't sit in the marketplace and share all these big things because there is an audience, right? And we are very aware of that in Judaism. We have the concept of Maris Ayin. For those of you who don't know, Maris Ayin is the idea of for the sake of being watched, right? The idea of like you can be eating a totally kosher burger, right? It's a soy patty or an impossible burger or whatever, and you have cheese on it. Someone who walks past you and sees you, who is visibly Jewish, right? Maybe you've got a kippah on, maybe you've got, big mug and David, you're wearing a tzechel, you're wearing, something. Someone can walk past you and be like, wow, I just saw that Orthodox Jew eating bacon. Can't believe this, right? There's the idea of non-Jews seeing it and passing judgment. And there's also the idea of your Jewish neighbor walking past me and being like, I just saw him do that, right? We have the understanding that nothing we do is, in public, in the view of others, nothing we do is without consequence for our actions. And that comes from centuries of persecution, of violent persecution, right? For example, there's a really, it's very impactful to me, and maybe it's because I know the value of it, but Joshua Trachtenberg, who is the first scholar to study Jewish folk magic and folk religion, he published his PhD at Columbia University in 1939. His book is Jewish Magic and Superstition.
He
I'm
was a
doing it on my
Reformed rabbi
Patreon.
too, wasn't he?
Mhm. He was a
Yeah.
reformer. He was based in the U.S. Um,
Yeah.
I'm doing that book in my book club, by the way. It's a really good one. It's
Oh, cool.
very interesting, especially because it was published so early. There's things that need to be fact checked.
Yeah.
But he was the first one to really study it. And he tells the story of this rabbi who said, right now, you will not clean the oven for Pesach. Passover is coming, but we cannot clean the oven. We cannot clean the communal oven because they will think we're doing witchcraft and they will kill us. And you might think, well, you're not cleaning an oven. What's the big deal? At Passover, you remove every ounce of leavened bread. This idea that you would leave the oven dirty, that you would still cook in it and still use it during Passover as an observant community is absurd. It's bonkers. But they said it's so dangerous. We know what it will look like to our non-Jewish neighbors, many of whom stand by us, but many who didn't. And we know that they'll report it to the church and we know it's dangerous. So this idea of like we are being watched, right? So I'm hyper aware at all times when I talk about Jewish magic that my audience is not just people who are supportive, whether they're Jewish or not, because I have many Jewish critics, not just of my politics, but of the fact that I share this information. They say, well, just because someone else did it doesn't mean we should do it, right? And so there's, I'm very aware of that. And when it comes to Judaism, it's one of the things that I often think of it as being invited to the table, right? You can be invited to the table and take part. I host non-Jews at my Shabbos table almost every week. Actually, literally every single week. I host non-Jews for rituals all the time. If a friend of mine is suffering, I will absolutely pour lead for them. I'll say brachas for them. I'll include them in ritual because they've been invited to the table, right? And I always give the example of a birthday party. Just because you go to a birthday party does not mean you go home and start lighting the birthday candles on a cake that you made for yourself and you're like, it's actually my birthday today now. No, you were invited to celebrate, you were invited to take part. That doesn't mean you steal the furniture and you take home their cake and you light it for yourself and you do it alone at home, right? And the third thing about it is that so much of Jewish tradition requires education. It requires knowledge. It requires learning. And one of the things I love about Judaism is that our rabbis aren't special conduits to God. A rabbi has no more connection to Hashem than I do, than my neighbor does, right? It's just that you know Jewish tradition and Jewish law, and you've studied more, and through that study comes knowledge. I would much rather have a dentist who is a dentist than someone who says they're a dentist but is actually not a dentist. I'd rather someone have the knowledge. Um, and so one of the things about Jewish tradition is a lot of it won't, when you take things out of context and you don't build the foundations to get there through education, through knowledge, you oftentimes don't understand what you're doing. And not understanding what you're doing leads to confusion and leads to mistakes and leads to sort of an ungrounded practice. Like, for example, someone bought Havdalah candles for me and they sent me a message and they're like, what am I doing wrong? Well, they're not Jewish, and they found out they had Jewish ancestry, so they wanted to connect with it, and they started lighting Havdalah candles on Shabbat.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever seen a Havdalah candle with 6 wicks burning at once. It makes a massive flame. It's very
Right.
scary. And they were like, I don't know how I'm supposed to let this burn overnight. And I was like, yeah, I completely understand. I get it. That's very scary. We need the education. And that's just, one very silly example, but we need the education to
Yeah.
bring us to a place where we can do this. And unfortunately, many people don't have that education built into their life anymore.
Yeah.
It used to be communal. It used to happen at the dinner table in the community life. You would learn it in school. And now we're in a very different place.
Yeah. One of the fascinating things about that, though, is that I have encountered so many people in the past, like since the pandemic, really, who have taken the time to learn a ton about Judaism. And they actually they do good work of like going to good sources and like figuring out what the sources like which they can rely upon and which they can't, and like begin building Jewish practice. And for various reasons have not converted, or are trying to convert and can't because of how hard it is, right?
Hmm.
Like especially for people who are even just not Zionist, let alone anti-Zionist,
Hmm.
finding a um, finding a pathway to Judaism is incredibly hard, um, for a couple of reasons. One is that like yes, you might have to like check um, yourself at the door to a certain degree, which has really always been the case. You're going there to learn, and like that's part of what conversion's about. But the other thing is, if you ask any rabbi in I mean, I don't know how it works amongst the Orthodox world. It might be less so, but in any Reform, Conservative, or Reconstructionist or renewal community about like what's going on with conversion right now, everyone has way too many people seeking conversion and reaching out to try to convert than they can actually help. Um, and so there's this, and at the same time, there are so many Jews, like you were just kind of hinting at, who just like don't even bother to get the knowledge. They don't even bother to try. They're not that interested. And so there's this very fascinating moment, which has definitely happened before, because if you look at the beginning of Pirkei Avot, a whole bunch of the early rabbis from the like beginning of Rabbinic Judaism were very obviously people who are not born Jewish. Um, there's something happening right now where there are a lot of people who are not born Jewish who are finding incredible meaning in Judaism, and a lot of people who were born Jewish who aren't finding meaning in Judaism. And figuring out how to um, help with this transition of whatever is going on is it's fascinating. Is a constant kind of like balance that I'm working on in my work, especially because I do so much Jewish education. Um, so yeah, I think that I really like your metaphor of the birthday cake. And at the same time, I like that you started out with this like you do whatever you want in your home, right?
Well,
And
I think there is
hopefully
a
like
difference
yeah,
between someone who wants to convert to Judaism, who wants to be of the Jewish people, and so they take on Jewish ritual in that process,
sure.
versus some people who have no interest in being part of the Jewish sphere, who are not interested in Judaism outside of the magic that they can take with them, right? I think there's one of like
Oh,
wanting to
interesting.
become
Yeah,
part of the whole and versus wanting to extract what is useful without becoming part of the whole. And I think it really depends on what community you are, right? For example, you're talking about people are coming to you for that education and that knowledge. I have people who come into my store and they think it's just a regular metaphysical shop, and they're like, "Do you sell the Kabbalah?" And I'm like, "Right." And then I'll be like, "What are you looking for?" And they'll be like, "Well, I heard that if I read the Kabbalah, I can make a lot of money." And it's like, well, this is two very, I think these are two very different groups of people who are looking towards Judaism.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
but yeah, there
the
is
Kabbalah
absolutely,
Center would say that they're correct.
it's really funny. My store is in a little plaza, and 3 doors down is a really great guy who has a blinds and shades and curtains company. His name's John. He's delightful. But that used to be a Kabbalah center. So sometimes people
Oh
come to my
wow.
store thinking I'm the Kabbalah center.
Yeah. Well, you kind of are now, right?
No, no. No. The Kabbalah Center has quite a few interesting allegations towards them, including
Oh yeah,
fraud,
for sure.
um, which I don't. So, yeah. But yeah, no, the Kabbalah Center is definitely an active culprit in the conversation of
Oh, for sure.
extracting Jewish magic. And hey, the Kabbalah Center also promotes the appropriation of other traditional rituals and items, like, for example, selling white sage, right?
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not shocking at all.
They sell a
Yeah.
kit that has a white sage bundle, which, for those of you who don't know, white sage is an indigenous plant to the Americas. It goes from about Santa Barbara to Baja, Mexico, Salvia apiana, and it is harvested en masse, wild poached. Most of the stuff on the market is wild poached. There's, for example, there was a bust that was done in here in California that was donated to the Gabrielino people, which is one of the indigenous tribes here in Los Angeles. In one night, two poachers took 400 pounds of white sage from a national park. And that stuff ends up on the market. And traditionally in Judaism, we actually do use sage. We just use other sage. We use Salvia officinalis, right, which is common garden sage. And we use other varieties of sage that grew all around the Mediterranean and in Europe and in Asia and Africa. And they sell that. Why? Because it makes money and it's popular,
Yeah.
unfortunately, even if it's not grounded in Jewish ritual or tradition.
Right. And they also like are known for really like taking advantage of people that are in deep need and
Yeah.
uh, extracting money from them when they
Hmm.
are hopeless people. It's like it's funny. I'd be interested if someone had. I'm sure because both of them are based out of LA that there's lines of connection between the Kabbalah Center and Scientology because they have very similar tactics as well. But yeah,
Yeah. Sorry,
um,
back to what you were saying. You were mentioning,
yeah,
people wanting to come to Judaism and struggling. And there are absolutely so many people who find themselves drawn to Judaism. And I think it's really beautiful. If this is your home, one of the things I've always said, the door is always open. And one of the things I feel really firmly believe about Jewish magic is I have no interest in changing the way anyone does anything in their personal life. I'm not asking you to take part in these rituals. I'm not asking you to carry these traditions. If you don't want to, that's between you and you. I have no interest in doing it, right? I just want you to know it's here if you want to come here so that you're not feeling like the only option are places like the Kabbalah Center, right? So that you
right.
know that there are Jewish traditions that you can embrace and that can embrace you at all stages of life.
Yeah, and I think honestly, like that is what is most inspiring to me about your work and what I find so important about your work because there is so much misinformation and abuse of information, particularly around mystical and magical ideas that get weaponized for like making money off of people rather than helping guide people and give people good resources to make their own decisions, right? And so, like, your approach in that regard is so important and so beautiful, and I'm so grateful for the way that you put it forward. Um, um, I want to like really shift direction here
Sure.
to the question of diaspora. So, your your shop is called Diaspora Magic, right?
Diasporic magic, yeah.
Diasporic magic, yeah. And diaspora is like a buzzword right now in the Jewish world and gets used in all kinds of different ways. And there are folks who struggle with the idea of using Jewish diaspora as a phrase because it still ends up centering Israel somehow, because if there's a diaspora, it must have come from somewhere, which is a critique I've heard from people. I'd love you
Definitely.
to for you to talk about like what the term means to you, what's important about understanding Jews as a diaspora, and what is positive about diasporic Judaism.
Yeah. I think the diaspora, I think that one of the things that I really love about diaspora is it does require us to hold both and to have nuance and to have that grip. And for, I always, one of the things I always say is I want to remain grounded in moral clarity, integrity, and intellectual honesty. Judaism was born in a place that we refer to as Eretz Yisrael, the physical land, right? That is where it was born. And it was born there from people who came from elsewhere. Again, Adam and Abraham and Sarah were not born there. Abraham was from Ur, which is in modern day Iraq, right? Sarai, who became Sarah, was not born there. They came to this land and they said, this land is holy. And that is where Judaism was born. And that is where the Jewish people, the concept of Judaism was born. And then we left. And we left, and I say left because I think that it's important to acknowledge that there were many waves of exile. And I think it's a struggle because we use the term exile to refer to both the physical leaving and something spiritual, galut or galus, right? We have the spiritual concept of galus, which is not the same as diaspora. Because you can be standing in Eretz Yisrael, you can stand with your hand on the Kotel, on the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, and we are still spiritually in galus because the Mashiach isn't here. I always say people are not using the Oxford comma. We cannot, the Mashiach cannot have come. This is not the messianic age of Edenic brotherhood with no war, no famine, no suffering, where we are living in unity. We're clearly not there yet, right? And whatever you believe Mashiach to be, right, however you sort of perceive it, the idea that we are suddenly in the messianic age is to me absurd. Um, and so we have this idea of diaspora and exile seemingly becoming so linked, even though they represent two different ideas. You know, Galus is spiritual. Diaspora is about the physical state of Judaism, right? Where the Jewish people are, Judaism is. And the Jewish people left through exile, through force, through abandon, like through literally like slavery, through being moved, being removed, and also some left by choice. And some also stayed, right? We've had this continuous presence in the land since Judaism arrived, and through the different variations of Judaism, right? We are not Second Temple Jews. We're not First Temple Jews. We have a very different practice. Rabbinic Judaism, though, was born in the land and then it dispersed. And one of the things that's so beautiful about diaspora is that we remade ourselves wherever we were. You cannot tell me that Judaism is the same everywhere. We're not a monolith. The Bukharian Jews had an incredible, beautiful liturgy and nusach and a minhag, traditions, right? They ended up becoming Sephardic. Their nusach and their liturgy became Sephardic when Sephardim came and brought their traditions and sort of imposed it, right? We have various versions of Ashkenazi tradition that was born in the land they called Ashkenaz, which was named after a sort of mythical northern people, like mystical idea, right? We named it Ashkenaz. We decided it was along the Rhine River and we called our people that. But even within that, we have so much diversity and we rebuilt these traditions. You can't look between a Satmar Jew and a Chabadnik and be like, oh, they're the exact same. I mean, I'm sure someone could with very, glazing eyes, but the reality is there's so much nuance and difference. You can look at the amazing community that was built in Europe, in Tunisia, in Algeria, in Morocco, in, Ethiopia, in Yemen, in Oman, in Iraq, in Baghdad, in India, right? There's Calcutta had like a beautiful Jewish history in Kaifeng in China, right? We have so many different versions of Judaism that came. Rabbinic Judaism was formed as a basis, and then as we dispersed, it continued to grow. Diaspora, and the reason I feel so strongly about diasporic magic is when I look towards the traditions that I grew up with, and even the traditions I didn't grow up with that I learned through research of Ashkenazi great, communities. I then also look towards the Sephardic communities, and you can see similarities. You can see identical practices because they came from that same core root that was born in Eretz Yisrael through Rabbinic Judaism. But then you can also see incredible changes. For example, I grew up with coffee reading all the time, right? You would read it. We would always call it Turkish coffee. Dear friend of mine, Cypriot, and is like, it's Cypriot coffee. There are other people who I know who call it many different things, a little coffee, often cooked in sand, in a copper vessel, and you pour it and then it sinks to the bottom and then you read the bots, the mud, right? You read the imprint on it. And the way that I was taught, you put the lid on it, you put the under plate, the saucer, that's the English word, the saucer, and then you swirl it towards you and you flip it towards you and then you read it, right? And in a really good text that I reference often, Ritual Medical Lore of Sephardic Women. I literally have it next to me. Ritual Medical Lore of Sephardic Women, Sweetening the Spirits, Healing the Sick by Isaac Jack Levy and Rosemary Levy Zumwalt. They'll talk about, they interviewed all these different Sephardic women from across the Sephardic diaspora, because remember, Sephardim are in many different areas and many different communities.
Mhm.
And they talk about how they learned and to coffee read, and they'd get their coffee read by their Arab neighbors, by their other neighbors in their different communities. And they share this tradition, not just in the Jewish community, but in the non-Jewish community, right? So we
Yeah.
see how we were influenced by where we live, how the land and the peoples of the land we were in influenced us indirectly or directly through, two little girls sharing secrets with each other, being like, well, this is what my mom does. They go, well, this is my mom does. And that little girl grows up and she's like, well, I have a problem, and I remember that solution, right? Adam Cohen and Adam Siegel and Dietrich Cohen, who wrote Ashkenazi Herbalism, in their second book, Woven Roots, they talk a lot about how neighbors, Jewish and not Jewish, would share knowledge and would share information. And sometimes that was mystical, and sometimes it was spiritual, right? There are lots of really cool ways that we as humans transcend our identity markers and even our own belief systems through necessity, through desire, right? If you feel like your life is in danger and you cannot do anything about it, and you need to survive, you need to protect your children, oftentimes you will cross a boundary of what it means to be a Jew versus a Christian, what it means to be Jewish versus Muslim, right? There are so many incredible things, and it's very taboo to talk about because one of the foundational lies that we tell ourselves is that Judaism's unchanging, that we
Mhm.
are the exact same as we've always been, that our brachas are the same brachas that have been recited for 1,000 years. And sure, some of them are, but they're not the same. We didn't even have bar mitzvahs until 1400s France, right? If that's the most quintessentially Jewish thing there is, that has nothing to do with Eretz Israel because it was born in literally 1400s France before it was spread around, right? If you go to a woman and be like, well, did you get your bas mitzvah? The idea of a bas mitzvah, of a reading, doing your thing, was not a thing before the 1970s, right? The
Yeah.
idea that women would do that, girls would do that, right? Judaism is so beautiful in the sense that we have thrived and survived. We have built tradition out of rubble. Literally, the rubble of the temple, the Beis Hamikdash fell, and we built from it so much more. We said we can't do sacrifices anymore. That's fine. Let's figure it out, right? We built so much. And I think that the idea of critical scholarship as opposed to theological scholarship is really important for my perspective. Because if I were to just accept with no criticism, everything that I was taught from a spiritual perspective, I think that I would be missing part of it. And if I were to
Mhm.
be taught everything that I learned simply from an academic perspective without understanding the nuance of how it shaped us internally, I think I'd also be missing a perspective. And so, diaspora is the absolute low of the low with atrocities and genocide and horrific pogroms and violence and anti Semitic caricatures and mythologies and stereotypes. And it is also survival and thriving. It is the Jewish golden age. It is Jewish learning. It is the creation of tradition. It is the creation of things that we consider foundational. Look at the matzah ball. We consider it like the quintessential. Look at challah. The way we braid our challah bread, born of Ashkenazim. And we know that because
Mhm.
we look to other challah traditions from other Jewish communities. And those are different because, again, we had an idea that we all carried with us, and how we executed it was intrinsically shaped by the communities we landed in. And so,
Yeah.
diasporic magic is not just an ode to that, but to all the other diasporas in the world. My partner is Mexican American, and we live in Los Angeles, which has one of the largest Mexican populations outside of Mexico, right? We have this beautiful, thriving Mexican American community because, to be fair, this did used to be Mexico, was Mexico not that long ago. Um, but we also have this sort of, someone in my live stream mentioned the other day, like the idea of the melting pot requires homogenization. The idea of the salad bowl means that everyone is still their own different thing, even though we're sharing a space and community, right? We have so many incredible cultures here in Los Angeles. We
Yeah.
have massive Japanese American populations, Korean populations, Haitian, Ethiopian, Vietnamese. We have, I mean, it's known as Tehrangelis, right? We have so many Iranian people here. We have these incredible communities of diasporas. And we also have a huge Black American community, and this diaspora carries traditions from, that again, from a place of origin and a place of rebirth wherever, right? So Judaism was born in Eretz Yisrael. That doesn't mean every single Jew is of that land genetically or historically. It means that Judaism was born there and Judaism was carried by its people. And its people were largely endogamous, right? Even though we did have, converts, and Jewish people have been very consistent, even as we've reborn. And I think this idea of like, well, to say that, diaspora is centering Israel is both true and untrue. I am centering the land because the land is what was deemed holy historically and religiously, and it was deemed part of our future, spiritually. But
Mhm.
the land is not the state. And the
Right.
modern nation state, using the name Israel, of course, is on purpose and intentional, right? The idea that Medinat Yisrael, meaning the modern political state of Israel, is the same as Eretz Yisrael is absurd. It's not true. And also the borders of Eretz Yisrael, the physical land, shifted many times during the various Jewish, Israelite kingdoms. We're not even talking, we don't have one specific set of borders because it is a spiritual, quasi mystical concept, right, of what it means to be physically in Israel. And I think that, again, for me to be intellectually honest is to acknowledge, yeah, the land has an incredible importance. And I think to deny that can, at times in certain conversations, be intellectually dishonest,
Yeah.
right? But again, it doesn't mean the state. The state
Right.
is not, the state is not, uh, uh, the state is not spiritual. It's not a spiritual vessel. It's not, a messianic warning or a messianic messenger. And I think that this idea that it is, um, this conflation is, I think it's dangerous and I think it's misleading. And I think that it takes us down the wrong path, ultimately.
So, let's go to the opposite version
Of
of
course.
where you ended. Um, as we start collecting questions. So right now, I'm going to open the chat and allow people to turn their video on. If you want to ask a live question, you can turn your video on or raise your Zoom hand. If you want to ask a chat question, we can go with that. But as people, I actually have to change the setting really quick. I was trying to do it while talking, and I just simply couldn't.
Don't worry,
Um,
I can't. Zoom is one of my deep enemies, despite the fact that we've been using it for 6 years. It's just, I feel
well, they
like it
keep
changes all the
changing the
time. That's what
interface.
they change it too often, and I can't keep
Yeah,
up.
yeah. Okay,
Not to sound
so
like someone stuck in my ways, just due to the conversation we just had, but
the chat is now open. If you want to ask a question and you're here live on Zoom, you can turn your video on, and we'll kind of line you up in that way. But as people do that, I'd love to hear like you're building something. You're building something amazing and beautiful. And you were just talking about like what it means to thrive in diaspora. Like what is you like 10 years down the line, what is the Judaism you would like to see in the world based on what you are currently doing?
I think that I want people to take the building blocks of understanding tradition, of understanding that tradition has changed and tradition has stayed the same, and we have the choice and the nuance there to build communities that are not afraid to look different from what we have now. I want synagogues. I want shuls because I love shul. I love going to shul. And you know what? Here's the thing. One of my favorite parts of it was growing up. I grew up incredibly close with the people in my community and breaking bread and sitting at the amount of really interesting things I learned just while we were having gefilte fish is great. I want there to be community that's doing that. And I want there to be spaces that are free of nationalism and these rigid dogmatic ideas of what it means to be a Jew that are drawn along political lines that are just so they're new, and new is not bad, but they are counterproductive to what we're looking for, right? New can be great and new can also be detrimental. And so I want us to take what we have that did work, that historically has supported us, and continue to bring those things to the future and to also allow for things to move away. There are many traditions that we let fall by the wayside for good reason. And this can be one of them, right? This idea of nationalism of a Jew looking this specific way of, having, I mean, police officers at the door who make it difficult to access the Jewish community if you are not a person who is traditionally what it looks like to be a Jew, right? I think that's really important. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
great. I agree 100%. Um, and people are already building it, which is great.
Yes, it is building
Yeah.
every single day. I've been loving the highlight you have of the different communities that are
Oh
affiliated.
yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, we're working on figuring out what to help out and what to work with in LA too. So I'll keep you updated. Yeah. Um, so there is a question in the chat from
Sure.
Abba, which I think is a really good question, Abba Solomon. And he asks, is this tradition maintained by parallel female knowledge and practice? Which I think is a great question.
Yeah, so Jewish magic, I think we can think of it as sort of two sort of diverging paths. We have, if we look at two different perspectives, we have the taboo and the non and the sort of accepted, right? The accepted practices, and in that accepted practices, we have certain things that are oftentimes sanctioned, right, by the rabbis, right? For example, there's one where we talk about crystals. Crystals are historically been used for many, many things in Judaism. We have the priestly breastplate, and each one of those crystals was used for a different thing. Like, for example, amethyst was for literally keeping on the horse, like keeping you on your horse as you were riding. But it's also been used to keep steady, to maintain the path, to keep the course going, and just travel safely, right? That was sanctioned by the rabbis, right? And then we also have things like Kabbalah, right? These mystical traditions that were often, again, sanctioned by the rabbis. But then we also have unsanctioned practices on the other side. And these were many times the practices of women, right? And so many of the practices of women were just considered, they weren't necessarily, outright spoken out against, but they were just what was happening while the rabbis were in the base midrash. They were in synagogue, they were studying. The women were doing everything else. For example, many of you might know this one, right? The idea of if someone is sewing a patch on your clothes or sewing something on your clothing, you bite the thread to keep it from hurting you, right? The idea of carrying a needle, a stolen needle, to protect you while you're pregnant, right? These are all traditions that were kept by women, right? We have the idea of throwing salt into the fire to close the mouth of someone speaking libelously about you, to nullify their decree. That is based in the Jewish tradition. It takes from our Jewish core of sanctioned practices and ideas and values, but it was carried by Jewish women. Much of these practices, especially the ones that sort of synthesize Kabbalah into action, into taking it and doing a thing with it, right? For example, like the red string that we are all very familiar with, that was carried by women for the protection of their children, of their families, of their communities, right? And so I think that one of the reasons that I focus so heavily on folk magic is because the folk magic we talk about was, again, by and large, by women who were forbidden from the base midrash. That's not to say they didn't know anything about Kabbalah. For example, they grew up in the same kind of thing that I did, where it was just part of what you learned. You learned about these
Yeah.
things, of course, but you didn't spend 12 hours a day studying with your buddies.
Right.
No, you had work to do and a life to live and things to get done. And so you synthesized those things and carried it. So that's why I focus so much on folk magic because it is the practice of women. That's not to say there weren't
Yeah.
men involved. That's not to say there weren't people who are outside of the categorization of men and women because Judaism does historically recognize various sexes. But this is generally the realm of women because this is the folk magic. It's the magic that took place oftentimes in the home. And that was the realm of women.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. Jay and Alder.
Hi, Z. Hi, Rabbi Andy. Thank you both so
Hi.
much for this collaboration. I wanted to ask, so we're very rural, like very rural,
Like a village of 2,000 people who are mainly Amish.
and especially as disabled folk, I really want to figure out ways to have more community and have more like magical connection with other people, Jews and non-Jews alike, but it is definitely hard to do when you're really isolated, both like physically and also because of various conditions. So I wondered if either of you had any suggestions for that beyond like attending wonderful seminars like this?
One
Sure.
that comes, oh,
Oh
go
no, you go
ahead.
ahead.
I was going to say that you may already be involved, but Shalmala in the online yeshiva has an incredible number of classes and lectures and stuff, but they have a very thriving online community that is always engaged, both
Hmm.
via Discord and other platforms, that tons of people use as like their primary like Jewish community. So I can
Yeah.
always recommend Shalmala for sure.
Yeah, and there are quite a few shows that do streaming online for if you do want to just be in service and experience it. I don't like to drive on Shabbos, and unfortunately, there is not a shul within walking distance from me because it's Los Angeles. I mean, it would be sort of a. I was really privileged to grow up within walking distance of my shul, and I mourn that every day I want it back. But yeah, there are lots online that have services that you can listen to and just feel the presence, even as you go about your day on, on Shabbos. That way you can still have it. Yeah, Shamala is great.
Yes. And there are others. They also, so Shon Mala and some others joined together for a thing. What are they calling
Mm,
it? Harifta?
I don't remember.
Harifta Yeshivas for Liberation. So there's a few of them. I just put the Instagram link in the chat. And yeah, Tzedek's new rabbi almost certainly has some mystical tendencies. I can always suggest Tzedek Chicago is a great place to plug in. They have a very thriving
Yeah.
online
A lot of my
community
Discord,
as
my
well.
patrons are members of Tzedek from around the country, and
Yeah.
some out of the country. They seem to love Tzedek.
Mhm.
Oh, perfect.
And ACJ does a lot of online stuff. We have
Yes.
classes. And the classes are very like social. And I will say, like, there's a particular fee we ask for, and then also, there's an application that for financial aid that we always honor. So it is an accessible platform as well, and you
And I'll
are
say
all
this,
welcome.
I don't know how ingrained you are with your Amish community, but what's really fun is Amish, Pennsylvania Dutch is also a Germanic language, and there are documented cases of discussions of how Yiddish and Pennsylvania Dutch mutually intelligible and really fun conversations with people who connected with their local Amish community for things like access to veggies and things like that. And I knew one of them who they even managed to get a local a kosher butcher to come out and work together and got that done.
Wow,
So yeah,
that's wild. That I mean, it makes perfect sense, but yeah, I love it.
yeah.
Um, our next question will be with Amy.
Yeah, and it's I may, but people get it wrong.
Hi, May. I'm
It's okay.
sorry.
Um, so I wanted to know, and this is a conversation that I believe you Zohar and others that we had at the Hanukkah party, which by the way, if you guys don't know, Zohar and Diasporic Magic, they have like events sometimes for the holidays, and they're great, and you should go if you're in the LA area. But you mentioned how you grew up going to Chabad and like as somebody who has also reached out to Chabad and stuff like that and just been in the Jewish community, how do you navigate like living in you know, in a community that is like Zionist normative, I guess? How do you even if you're not still attending Chabad, like this the general Jewish community, that is kind of the assumption. And so like where, where do you find comfort while still being in this community, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I think that it depends on how you move through the world, right? I have been willing to be the black sheep my whole life. Well, actually, you can't say that or that's a crazy thing to say, or that was incredibly bigoted, is something I've been saying since I was about 14. I've never been afraid to be that person, which I think does help, in the sense that if someone says something obscene near me, they will know it. But also, it depends on what you want to get out of it, right? The Chabad that I grew up attending was not as intensely Zionist as some are. I hear stories about people who are like, and they had a big thing donate directly to the IDF right at the door. That's not something I experienced, right? That was not how I experienced. And it was absolutely normative. That's not to say it wasn't, but it wasn't as virulently, I would say, as some of the other ones that I've heard people discuss. Um, but I've been to a variety of Chabads, and I do think it depends on where you're going and also what you're trying to get out of that experience, right? If you're going for a party, it might be different than if you go for just like a regular Shabbos service in the morning, right? If you're going for just Kiddush, you just want to go in, you want to daven, you want to get out of there. It's going to be different than if you go for their Purim party, right? It's going to be a different experience. Um, and because it's what I grew up with, it's where I feel the most comfortable in general, and it's where I feel the most comfort, right? I would say I feel a lot more anxiety or like stress or out of placeness when I go to, say, for example, a Reconstructionist celebration of Rosh Hashanah because I don't know the events, I don't know what's happening, and I don't know any of the melodies we're singing. Okay, I forget the lyrics as soon as we start singing a different melody, every single bracha goes directly out of my head. I've never known these words before. You sing the Chadodi in a different melody. I don't know these lyrics anymore. So again, I think it really depends on, if you're saying, how do I find comfort? I think it's because I'm so familiar with the services and I'm so familiar with the tunes and the melodies and just the classic way of being there that I think that it just inherently brings me more comfort. But if it's not something that brings you that, it might not even be that place, right? It depends on how you want to move through the world. If you want to be the person who says that was really unacceptable, which I have been many a time, um, I will say a lot of people are not nearly as confident as they are online. But yeah, as Jamie in the chat said, it feels like an exercise in take what you like and leave the rest a lot of the times. If you're going to be in a space, oftentimes it does have that feeling of like, I'm here for this specific thing. I will fight you about it later, but right now I'm here for this specific thing and I will take with it what I can, right? Which I hope was helpful.
Veronica.
Hello, I just had a fairly simple question, but I'm just thinking about like how can I get more involved with neo Hasidism and Jewish magic locally, since like it feels like early in the meeting you had talked about how for a lot of Jews it's like you just go to temple and you go back home and you're just alone all the time, and that's been me for years, and that's not really been what brought me to Judaism. um, and not what made me convert and take the step to like go into the mikveh. I feel like the fortressing of our shuls has been what like ended up making me leave for a period of time recently, like leave practice, and I made up this whole mind story that somehow I wasn't Jewish because of whatever. And I'm like, no, 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 that's not how that works. I have friends and rabbis who've been telling me that's not how that works. And I'm like, you talk about how magic and stuff cross the lines of like these identity lines, and I'm like, wait a second, I did that. So I'm just like, how can I bring more Neo Hasidism and Jewish magic into my life, especially in this environment where it's like none of the rest of my family are Jewish. I My mom asked me to basically invite her to shul tonight, and that's great. That's great that she's coming, but it's like how do I bring that magic and that neo Hasidism into my life because I really need it.
Yeah. So I will say, I saw that you said you're in Seattle, and there's a
Yeah,
community called Bet Olive that
yeah,
I don't know if you're familiar with yet. But I think they do some like solid neo Hasidut stuff there.
okay.
I'll put the link in the chat. But I also think Zohar probably has some good suggestions for books and other ways to like get some rooting in that.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to Hasidut is so much about learning, and it's also one of the things that I remind myself so much is a phrase that I heard, I mean, God, in my childhood, the idea of like to be Hasidic is to be a lamplighter. It's to bring light with you, to carry that. And so one of the things that is so important is one is learning. And when you light that spark, and you spark that light, actually is what I meant to say. When you spark it through education, and that could be learning about Hasidic leaders, right? I love reading the stories of the Baal Shem Tov, right? There's so many good legends, and some of them, a lot of them are free online, and there are lots of different versions because these are legends and folklore. One of my favorites is the Baal Shem Tov and the werewolf. Which is really good. It's just beautiful and it just makes my heart so happy. And there's all these incredible leaders, right? One of them is great is Chana of Lidmir. They called her Rebbe. There's a book about her. She was known as the Maiden of Lidmir. She learned Torah with her father. She learned Talmud with her father. She eventually married and she either divorced him or he died. I don't remember. But point is, she ended up living out in a little cabin in the woods and everyone would come to her to learn. And they called her Rebbe, right? She was transgressing, she was crossing these boundary lines of identity and of gender markers and of societal patriarchal standards. And she was so ingrained in these learnings, in this knowledge, right? She shared it. And so learning about the people who came before us and their perspectives, it will change the way you approach things, right? I think, yes, absolutely. Beit Aleph, right? If you want to have that in-person connection and community, but also part of it is when you start lighting that spark inside yourself with knowledge and with learning about it, it'll often be reflected in your outside life, right? And how do you bring that magic in? When you have the knowledge, you can bring it in. For example, one of the things we share every single Shabbos, and I grew up with this tradition, right? So for those of you who don't know, every time you break your challah, and I don't know if you're a cutting family or a tearing family. My family was a tearing family. You just tear that challah to pieces like wild animals, v'lechayas, if you will. And before we do that, everyone puts their hand out and they get a sprinkle of salt in their left hand. Kabbalistically, left is the reception. And so the idea was that you put salt in your hand to receive not just the salt of life, but to receive prosperity, abundance. And you want that the salt is what makes a meal, according to Jewish teaching. It's what fulfills the meal. Without salt, it's not a meal. And that's why you have to eat your challah with a piece of salt, not just so you can have the incredible the great things of like prosperity and abundance and fulfillment and cleansing, right? Salt is a curative substance. It's a cleansing substance. It's also a rounding substance, a fulfilling substance. And there's this little tradition of every Shabbos, my mom would sprinkle salt into all of her hands. And now that I'm like the leader of my house in that sense, I'm the one who's like sprinkling salt in everyone's hand. And it's a really beautiful tradition. And it's a moment of magic. It's a moment, but it's rooted in so much more. And when you give yourself the knowledge to take these things on, it opens the door to the doing. And it opens the door for these little tiny moments every day of more. Someone mentioned they're making challah right now. When you make challah, you take, hafrashat challah, right? You take the challah. That moment, right, as you're making that bracha is a hugely important spiritual time where you can make things happen. You can pray for whatever you want. And as you burn it, as you destroy it, right, that is a moment of intense, deep ceremonial sacrifice, right, where you have that moment of strength, of knowledge, of putting into action everything you've been thinking about the whole week. It comes to sort of a fruition in that moment. And so with knowledge comes action, which I know is annoying because not every time, you don't always want to read all the books, but
that the study of Torah is equal to them all, right? Like that is
exactly.
the underlying basis of all Judaism, and studying Chassidut is still studying Torah. Everything is studying
Yeah.
Torah. All right, we have one last question from Janine.
Thank you so much. And if I may begin by saying thank you, Zohare Jacobi, for your generous sharing of all of this incredible information.
Yeah.
I just wondered, in the context of lighting candles for ritual purposes, is there is there such a thing as oil that can be lit in an oil holder for ritual in the same way that traditional Sephardic Shabbat does not use candles, but little oil holders that have a wick in them.
Yeah, absolutely. We still do that in many Ashkenazi homes as well. We use oil instead of um, wicks. I'm sorry, instead of candles. There are many online. You can buy them in many different stores. I mean, if you Google like oil lamp filling, many of it's olive based. There are some that are paraffin based. There are other oils as well. I like the olive oil ones. I won't lie to you. My local Indian market has a ton of them, and they're fantastic. And they come in a little squeezy tube, which makes it very easy to use. There are also
Those I have for Shabbat, and I'm wondering whether you sell an oil in your shop for ritual purposes that would do the
I
same
don't
thing.
sell an oil for burning because legally there are quite a few different rules around selling that kind of thing. I don't, unfortunately, though I wish I could.
Okay. So what would you recommend that I do in order for the oil that I do have become something that I can use for ritual purposes?
As long as it's a clean burning oil, it is, I mean, it's kosher for ritual purposes. The only thing you want when it comes to the oil that you're using, and Andy, you're welcome to interrupt me and correct, but the only thing that you really need for it to be a kosher candle or light is that it's a stable flame. And as long as it burns for the correct amount of time for whatever ritual you're doing, or for example, if it's Shabbos, you need to burn for the allotted time period. But it should be, as long as it's a clean burning oil, it's totally fine.
Yeah.
Thank
The
you
wick is
so
probably
much.
more important than the oil.
Yeah.
The wick isn't guttering.
Mhm.
And then it like Zohar just said, that it's just a stable light, then you're good.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite things because you can use whatever you need to get through
Yeah.
it. One of my favorite tricks, if you don't have a Havdalah candle while you're like, say you're traveling somewhere and you forgot your Havdalah candle, you can go to the grocery store and get 3 birthday candles and hold 3 birthday candles together. And as long as all the wicks are touching, now you have a Havdalah
Yeah.
candle.
You've got a torch.
You
Yeah.
got it.
Great. Zohar, thank you so much for being so generous with us and with your time, and for all of the incredible work that you do and will continue to do. And I'm truly hopeful this is the first of many collaborations.
Yes.
Um, is there anything you want to leave everybody with?
I think that Judaism is so oriented towards liberation, and all of that comes in so many different forms, and it comes in so many different ways. And wherever you are in your Jewish journey can be oriented towards, again, integrity, moral clarity, intellectual honesty, and it can be incredibly fulfilling to dive into aspects that you've never seen before. And it can also just be incredibly fulfilling to know that Judaism, wherever you are in your journey, has somewhere for you to land. Whether you're not Jewish or you are Jewish, there is something that you can learn from every aspect of it. Um, yeah, that's
Amen.
that's where I am at.
Amen. Yeah.
Amen, amen.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm actually not sure who our next interview is going to be. It may be next month. We are, fingers crossed, hosting a book release event for Benjamin Moser's new book on the history of Jewish anti-Zionism. And I'm not sure if we can live stream it, but if we can, that might end up being our interview for next month. And then in 2 months, we are in October going to be doing an event about anti-Zionist Jewish fiction writing. So stay tuned. This will all be out soon. And if you have ideas of folks you would like to be on this series, feel free to shoot me an email, akahn@acjna.org. And please go to Zohar Shop, diasporicmagic.com. Is it diasporicmagic.com or is it
It
just
redirects to
Jewitches.com?
Jewitches.com. Don't
Okay,
worry. It'll take you to
Jewitches.com.
Jewitches.
Yes, go
Yes.
buy some things for your Shabbos and
Yes.
have a peaceful Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thanks,
Good
everyone.
Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom.